Good morning, guys, and thanks for joining. Let's make a quick start, keeping in mind there are a couple of assessment criteria in this unit. So I know that some of you will have sessions at 10 o'clock. So without further ado, we're looking at continuing our journey in the unit, one, which is understanding principles and practices of internal quality assurance and assessment. So here we have covered learning outcome 1 and 2 so far. In the first learning outcome, we had basically looked at what are the principles of quality assurance and why is quality assurance important from a point of view of any educational setup. In the second learning outcome, we had looked at the models. Basically, in the first one, we continued with the principles of assessment and verification, wherein we covered the VASCAR model. In the learning outcome 2, we looked at some of the important activities that you as an IQA do and plan, and who are the key stakeholders in this whole process. So we looked at things like you have assessors, you have tutors, teaching assistants, you have quality managers, you have the management, and even to a certain extent, learners or students who are also a part of the stakeholder management matrix. Now, in the third learning outcome, we are looking at today covering what is it required to maintain and improve the quality of assessment within education. So here, the main aspect would be that to understand why this process of internal quality assurance or verification is a continuous process. That means we need to be able to understand in terms of how do we, if I'm wearing the hat of an IQA or the lead, IQA or quality manager, that how do I ensure that I maintain these standards of assessments within the organization? Now, when I look at doing that, we will be looking at covering this particular learning outcome in 4 assessment criteria. The first one will be to look at how do we explain the criteria of how quality is going to be judged. Now, we are going to do this in the context of higher education. So in this case, what we are looking at is finding out what are the key parameters and criteria which you need to explain to the team first that you are going to be following in terms of managing quality and obviously ensuring that when we look at quality, the assessments, the judgments, the fairness, the consistency in judgments is applied throughout the process across the year. Different terms, obviously, from a point of view of university, colleges, and across the year. That's why I say. The second part would be to look at summarizing the different types of feedback that you can provide to the assessor. So sometimes when you look at if there are areas which are slipping, if there are areas which are requiring improvement, then in that case, what would be the various mediums through which you will go ahead and obviously look at the process of providing feedback. Now, this could be one-on-one feedback to the assessor. This could be feedback on the documentation part of it in terms of how the assessment is being carried out as a process. It in some cases can also be on sharing best practices. So feedback could be of different types. And in such cases, when we look at the feedback, we are basically looking at understanding this particular point of view, from a point understanding that what are the various mechanisms that are available for the processes of feedback from an IQA to an assessor. The third part that we're going to cover is the importance of standardization meetings. Now, there are this particular word that we give and use, quite a lot in terms of, the process of, let's say, maintaining consistency, accuracy, and the fairness of judgment. So we'll come across this particular discussion today, wherein what we need to do is explain what is a standardization meeting first, or why do we need to carry out standardization? And then when we carry it out, what are the requirements in relation to the assessment? Those are the bits that we'll cover in the third assessment criteria. So a lot of us at higher education institutions, look at standardization meetings to look at consistency, quality assurance, professional development. But what is the whole essence of carrying out this meeting? And what is the end objective that we need to achieve as an IQA when you carry this meeting out? And the last one that we are looking at is talking about relevant processes or procedures regarding if there are disputes in the quality of assessments. For example, sometimes you have learners who come back to you and say, okay, I do not agree with this grade which have been provided. And the disagreement on this grade then is at some stage referred to the IQA. And that also reflects on the fact that if IQA has gone ahead and agreed that grade with the assessor, and if there is a dispute which occurs, then how do you handle that particular dispute? What are the contexts available to understand that why this as an area, a gap area has gone through first, and then looking at understanding how do we resolve those disputes. So if at all they arrive, why do they arise? And then if they do, then how do we resolve them? So these are the bits that we are going to be looking at today in the learning outcome 3, which is understanding how to internally maintain and improve quality of assessment. So our discussion is going to be centered around some slides and discussion. So let me switch over and then we'll make a start. So in terms of the indicative content, we've got a fair bit of indicative content, which is primarily being covered here. So we look at maintaining and improving quality of assessment. We look at constructive feedback to assessors, advice and guidance, sharing of best practices, signposting, which is required sometimes to be done in terms of providing additional information. And those are the areas that we'll discuss when we talk about how do you give different types of feedback to assessors. And then the second part of the focus of the outcome is to look at standardization meeting and any disputes which arise, and how do we resolve and ensure that the quality of assessment is maintained throughout the year. Now, let's look at a few things first before we start in terms of understanding what is quality. I know this is a word that has come across quite a number of times, but essentially we need to put this into a bit of a context here when we talk about quality. So in general, if you look at the dictionary meaning of the word quality, it refers to the degree of excellence. So if I take an example, in a different organization like a manufacturing and an engineering organization, what the quality manager there would essentially be focused on is that how do we look at defects in terms of part per million, or if they're producing certain quantities, they want to do away with the defects. And regular inspections to detect these defects and to rectify them would be a process which essentially will signify that they are trying to do is do improvement. And those improvement in the quality of the product or the build of the product is essentially going to be related to quality. So when we apply this in this context of improvements that are being done to achieve a particular degree of excellence, or to achieve a particular state wherein we say that this product is now defect free or defects are negligible. So if sometimes in qualities, statements, when we look at Deming's model, and we talk about the principles of quality, essentially what you are going to say is anything in terms of parts per million, if it's less than 6, then it is considered to be a product which is moral and robust. There is no defect in the product. Now, similarly, in the education sector, when we talk about maintaining quality, or maintaining the consistency of assessments, we will use the word quality. And here the idea is the expectation of the assessor from the student, the IQA from the assessor, the management or the quality manager from the IQA will all tend to be having expectations which are going to be based on certain policies and procedures defined in the organization. So when you look at student and the assessor relationship, we look at learner agreement, we look at, for example, malpractice policy, we look at anything to do with even assessor malpractice policy. Those are documentations that you refer to try and maintain certain consistency in the assessments which are happening. When I look at the policy between assessor and IQA, you are looking at teaching and learning strategy, you're looking at internal verification policy, you're looking at quality processes, which could be, if in larger organizations, you see these committees and setups, which could be quality committee, academic committee, and they would essentially be, looking at measuring or looking at accountability from a point of view of ensuring that there is consistency and processes are being followed, and the guidelines which have been laid down are being used essentially to do assessments which are fair, consistent, and reliable. Now, if I look at quality standards in education, if we stretch this a bit further and say, okay, what do they mean? QA, which is Quality Assurance Agency, has basically defined a standard which basically says a quality code, essentially, which essentially means that at some stage, what you're going to see is that at any given point in time, you would generally see that following the code would allow institutions to bring the key processes into their organization, and these key processes into the organization would essentially be allowing them to look at maintaining fairness of assessment, consistency of assessment, reliability of assessments, and decisions in such cases would support the process of teaching and learning. So they will relate to the teaching strategy of the organization. So quality standards created by different organizations, when I look at schools, it could be the ISI, Independent Schools Inspectorate. If I look at training providers in general or apprenticeships, it could be off-call. And when I look at higher education, in this case, it could be Quality Assurance Agency within the context of, UK. Now, we also have other such bodies. We have British Council, we have British Accreditation of Colleges, we have ASIC. These are all bodies which essentially give you some sort of a recognition if you are following their code of conduct or their book of quality, if I may put it this way, or the quality manual. And that would show that you are maintaining standards, you are adhering to standards, you are adhering to legislation or regulation which is applicable in that sector. And as an institution, if you're adhering to those legislations, regulations, and following the standards, implementing the policies and procedures, then you are basically following the quality standards, which would help you teach and deliver and maintain certain standards as per that particular provider. So that is where we would look at the aspect of, quality standards in education. So an example over there will be, if I look at universities, there are lots of standards which have come in over the years. You have the TEF standard. You also have the quality assurance code, which is essentially, applied when qualifications are being developed. You have the university ranking as a bit of a standard to say, okay, if the university ranks higher, it is because it ranks higher because there are placements which happen, student experience is good. There are opportunities for students to conduct or do research, and in general, in some cases, you would look at these standards meeting the standards which have been defined in the ranking list. So the 5 parameters would typically of student experience and placements at the end of the program would give more points to certain universities, and that is why they'll be higher up on the ranking table. Now, the overarching message in terms of this particular learning outcome is that we need to be looking at how do we maintain and improve the quality of assessment. So if I look at the VASCAR model, which is going to come time and again in our discussions, is validity, reliability, fairness, consistency of assessments. We are going to be looking at, making sure that whatever decisions are taken when assessments are done, they are done vis-a-vis this overarching, strategy or some sort of a strategy which has been developed within the organization, which mimics teaching and learning strategy. And when we look at this as a concept, what we are looking at is that in order to maintain the assessment and the fairness of assessments, which are done predominantly for student work or any sort of work which is produced by learners, which could be portfolios, assignments, endpoint assessments, which is assessments which are predominantly done at the place of work, whatever, assessments are done would essentially follow these particular processes in order for us to be able to maintain and say that we are following the standard. These standards are helping us to maintain finally, certain aspects of quality. And if I substitute a word or consistency in the process that we apply in terms of grading, in terms of assessments, in terms of examination across the board within that institution. So there are bits and pieces that we are going to cover in a bit more detail. So, but just very briefly, things like regular feedback and reviews, standardization meetings, the development of CPD or career professional development, which is ongoing trainings. Nowadays, because of the availability of big data or data available in organizations, there are lots of things which are, based on the fact that data, existing data or previous data can be used to drive or make decisions. Obviously, if it is a very large institution like in a university wherein you have thousands of students studying, then in such cases, the process of continuous improvement in relation to professional development becomes important. And that is where, corrective action plan or plan, do, check and act cycles come into play, because there are slippages, gaps, which are identified time and again. And in order to keep that consistency of assessment going across, then in such cases, what will happen is, or when a good example here would be when you have students who have varying requirements because of their disability. So you have to make available resources, or for example, you have to sometimes tailor your sessions in a way wherein you have to deliver to ensure that all learners are learning in the classroom, then in such cases, when you look at variability, that variability can produce irregularities in terms of how assessments or assessment methods can be applied. And in such cases, when you have different types of assessment methods being applied because of the requirement of the learner, then in such cases, continuous improvement needs to be planned. So if you have learners who are dyslexic, if you have learners who have a disability, they are on wheelchair, or for example, they have disability of hearing, or and in such cases, when resources have to be allocated, assessment methods have to be changed. So in some cases, if somebody is severely dyslexic, you might allow a scribe to do an assignment. Now, in such cases, the method of assessment might change to a viva or a viva voce, essentially, which is oral examination or some sort of portfolio-based assessment as against regular assignments. And in such cases, you need to apply the process of continuous improvement. Now, stakeholder involvement is quite important, and one of the things which we get to see in a lot of places, specifically large institutions, is that when we have these meetings, which are standardization meetings, or when we look at communication between different departments, and then in such cases, you would need to have stakeholder involvement. So, for example, I'll give you a live example. Say, for example, I go to a large college from Pearson, and what happens in that large college, which is attached to a university, is there are lots of departments. Now, for the purposes of an examination board, which happens within the university, the extension of that happens in the partner college as well. Now, when that extension happens, there are key stakeholders which are involved from the university in the moderation process, in the examination board, or the final exam board process before grades and everything is awarded. So in such cases, you get to see a full team which is working behind the scenes to ensure that students, get their grades on time, and there is a process which is applied to ensure that there is consistency across grading by different assessors teaching different programs across different departments. So in such cases, what tends to happen is that you would have an examination officer, you'll have a registration officer or a manager, you'll have the program manager, you'll have the head of the department, you'll have the assistant vice principal, and and then along with that, the key people would be the lecturers and the teaching tutors, which are basically teaching, and then you have study skill tutors or tutors which are providing specific support to learners in context of the units or modules that they are studying in that particular term. Now, when I look at this, along with that, you'll have some administration staff, which could be in IT, which could be in library, which could be in other departments, which are also providing key additional support to learners. And when in such cases, you look at an exam board, there is a lot of stakeholder involvement. That means you have different sets of people coming from different teams who would be a part of that final exam board, and they would have a role and function to play in order to ratify the results, and finally before they are submitted online, or say to an organization before the certification happens. Now in such cases, you would see that each of these stakeholders which come in, they have certain importance in that process. So when we look at stakeholder involvement in a large organization, it will tend to have lots of people, and in such cases, a stakeholder management matrix need to be also evolved, which allows for clear lines of communication, which allows for clear lines of meeting to happen. And in such cases, you have committees which are formed. So you'll have a quality committee, academic committee, a student staff liaison committee, a student committee, and these committees will be all the stakeholders that we talk about will be part of certain committees. And when these meetings happen, when these get-togethers happen to conform to agreeing on certain aspects, you would see that this involves processes which are related to quality. So in some cases, you will run standardization meetings. In some cases, you will ensure the accuracy of data. In some cases, you will run and see if the policy implementation has been done from a quality assurance perspective. And in some cases, you will run meetings which are going to primarily be looking at the methods of assessment identified even before the delivery of the program starts in that academic year, and how did they go through when you evaluate towards the end. So that is where you would see a stakeholder involvement also happening. Now, if you bring it home and look at UK Versity just as an example, we have, say, 3-4 different stakeholders in the process. So you have the IQA, you have the assessors, you have the students, and you have the management. So these four typical stakeholders would have four different areas that they would go into. Now, within the operations team in the office, with instead of saying management, you would see there's a registrar and there's an examination officer, there is a course coordinator, and then you have a student coordinator. You have an IQA, you have some teachers, and you have some tutors. So if you look at this as an engagement in regards to how do each of them play a role in helping to maintain and improve the quality of assessment, it is quite evident that these things are a minimum required within an institution in order to have and even say that you are trying to maintain and improve, or at least keep to a certain level when we talk about assessments and when we talk about quality within the organization. So the whole essence of today's learning outcome is to understand the role of different stakeholders, the process, and the outlets that we use to carry out these assessments and maintain the quality. And last but not the least, what role does each of the key, I would say, stakeholder plays in terms of helping to ensure that the quality of assessment is maintained. If there are slippages, then how it can be improved, and what kind of PDCA or corrective action plan, as sometimes we call it, instead of PDCA, but basically is how corrective action plan can be put into place to maintain and bring it back to a certain level wherein we can say that yes, there is quality of assessments and we are maintaining that quality within the organization. So with this bit, I've obviously put some some of the key terms which have come up here. I've put one or two slides in for you to go through things like the importance of quality management, plan, do, act cycle, PDCA cycle, and then obviously one or two theories that we can relate to from a higher education perspective, which were covered in Learning Outcome 2, constructive alignment and assessment for learning, AFL. Is something that you can revise and go through just to look at what we are discussing and how do you underpin that with a bit of theory related to higher education. Now, any questions on this so far? I'm pretty sure that most of you see this happening in your context on a day in, day out basis, but any questions that you want to ask at this stage?
Nothing.
No.
Right. So most of the points which are on the table, what I've done is I've explained that in terms of understanding what is regular review and feedback. For example, when assessments are done, every month there should be some sort of a feedback which should be given not just from the assessors to the student, which goes out in the form of summative and formative feedback, but also should be given from the IQA to the assessor. Now, IQA can also provide this feedback primarily to tutors or lecturers, because there are teaching observations that happen. Peer-to-peer feedback can also happen, because if I'm teaching, somebody else is observing my teaching, they can also give me feedback on what are the best practices in my teaching, what are the areas which I'm lacking in, and that would help the colleague improve in terms of its teaching and delivery. So feedback can be of different types. Feedback is primarily required to ensure that you are continuously, I will put it this way, hitting a particular criteria or a line, and your standards are being maintained. And that is why feedback from assessor to the student to the assessor, from the assessor to the IQA, from the IQA to the assessor, from the assessor, from the IQA to the teacher or the assessor, tutor or the assessor, and from that to the IQA is a regular process, and that should happen. And that is why we call it 360-degree feedback. Now, when we look at, generally speaking, if I systematically, so in order to summarize, if we do apply all these strategies, which are, basics of what I've summarized in this table, what we'll be able to fairly assume and say confidently is that if these processes and strategies are followed within the organization, there will be consistency in terms of assessment as a process. That consistency will depict quality, and that quality will instill confidence within the management to say that yes, the teaching and learning strategy follows a particular standard, and that standard is the standard depending on where you are teaching or where the organization, is, having its accreditation from. So if it's universities, once in 4 years, QA would inspect. They would find these standards and the practices which are being implemented. These practices which are being implemented would reflect certain standards and benchmarks, and these benchmarks would conform to the quality code. And what they would then do in their report after the audit would be to say that yes, the college or the institution is conforming to these standards and we are happy with, or they give out some sort of a rating. Similarly, when you look at Ofcol, they do a rating which is below standards and meeting standards, good and excellent. So these are parameters that you could be able to confidently say that by implementing these strategies within your organization, you are able to consistently maintain those standards and say that the assessments are fair, reliable, valid. They're aligned towards the educational goal. That means they're helping to meet the curriculum requirements, course requirements which are being taught within the setup, and they are overall conforming to some sort of a quality standard defined within the code. Say, for example, for university, it's QA. For schools, it is ISI. For FE colleges, it could be ISI/QA. For other training providers, it could be off-call standards. Now, if I look at just very briefly going into some of the assessment criteria. So the first one talks about explaining the criteria used for judging the quality of the assessment process. Now, what do we mean by judging the quality of the assessment process? What do you mean here when we say judgment of quality of assessment process? So the moment you talk about assessment process, one of the things which should come to your mind should be the assessment cycle. As simple as that. The moment you talk about assessment process, what we are looking at is clearly looking at the assessment cycle, which primarily is the cycle that we need to look at in terms of this particular option. So when we do talk about, say, for example, judging the quality of assessment process as an IQA, what you're going to do is see how the assessment is planned for a particular course, or say, for example, a particular module. And you would start by looking at how is the assessors or a group of assessors, if there are many, or if it's a department, you're looking at, say, a business management department and they teach business and business related qualifications. What you are going to look at is how is the program manager or the, say, for example, the course manager or tutors in conjunction are planning the method of assessments for that particular program. So you will start with looking at the assessment cycle, how many times the assessment is planned, what are the goals of the assessment, what benchmarks they're using, and how will the data be collected, how it will be reflected, how it will be analyzed, and are there clear processes in terms of defining how the assessment cycle would work. For example, looking at setting the goal. Now, at the beginning, if I give you an example, what tends to happen is that most organizations sometimes would look at, measuring at the end of the year the, let's say, achievement of learners. Now, the achievement of learners can be measured in different ways. One could be achievement in terms of pass rate. Second could be achievement in terms of the grades that the learners are achieving. Third, it could be in terms of the achievement overall in terms of knowledge, skills development, along with the grades which the learners are, getting. So, in short, depending on the course or the type of course we are looking at for the assessments, if it's a functional skills course that we run, the assessments are exam-based, and the exam-based assessments are pass or fail. So as simple as that, in those cases, the goal and the objectives which are set in by the tutor who's teaching functional skills as a qualification would be very clear. They will go through a cycle of setting goals, identifying issues, asking questions, gathering evidence if the learners are understanding, for example, how the test is to be done. It is a time test. They have various bits and pieces related to how they will appear in the test. Topic list would be available. They will interpret the findings. They will at some stage decide that this way of teaching or teaching methodology is working. And in some cases, because the assessment is primarily done through the process of exam, they would then, the decision of that, whether the student is passed or failed, would happen once the paper is checked. And if the decision is the student passes, then obviously the learning has been successful. And in such cases, what you will do is you will primarily keep with that particular assessment process. So when we talk about judging the quality of assessment process, what IQAs will look at is how is the assessment actually planned? What is the assessment cycle? And what would be required in terms of how the planning of that assessment cycle has been done. So we go back to the VASCAR model, which is looking at validity, reliability, fairness, transparency, and feasibility of assessments which need to be done. And as long as you're following that as a model to see how assessments have been planned, you would be looking at maintaining or understanding, not maintaining, you're understanding the criteria of how you're going to judge the quality in terms of the assessment process. So a question which could come to your mind and you could ask the assessors when you're in the IQA position, or when you're doing the or maintaining the IQA processes for an organization, would be how do you set goals? So in such cases, you would ask them a lot of questions in terms of how's the assessment plan, what are the different types of assessment methods you're looking at, and are these assessment methods fit for purpose? Are they fit for the particular curriculum or the course which is being taught? Now, once you have assessed and identified that yes, the assessment methods are fit for purpose, at some stage you will go into detailing of how the implementation of that is happening. Is there any consistency in terms of implementation? Are there any variances allowed or required because of the ability of the learners? At some stage, what you do is, as an IQA, when you do the IQA process, well, that is where, if I look at you just as an example of assignments, why do you think the IQA looks at a number of assignments across a cohort? It is to understand if there is any variation in the method of assessment. Are there any borderline assessments being done? Is there leniency being applied? Or is there a consistency in terms of ensuring that the judgment being applied across the tasks which are being assessed in a unit are exactly the same across a number of learners? So that is where, when they request for a sampling plan from the assessors, they are basically looking at gathering evidence, and the IQA process that they take or undergo when they assess the judgments made by the assessors on the assignments and the scripts of the learners is basically nothing but interpreting their findings. And that interpretation of findings is primarily related to looking at whether the judgment is fair, consistent, reliable, transparent. Is it borderline? When I use the word borderline, sometimes during the assessment, we write, although you've met the criteria, but this is borderline because you have not underpinned the theory, or you've not provided an example to show the application. And or in some cases you would write that this is borderline because the justification for the command verb has not been fully elaborated. So when analysis is required, or comparison is required, or evaluation is required, you have not given the pros and cons, or advantages or disadvantages, or maybe in some cases an example, or towards the end made a conclusion in terms of agreeing with the judgment. And because that has not been done, the work is mostly descriptive, and I would still let it go because you've covered most of the cogs in terms of maybe just the example is missing. So in that case, you put borderline. But the IQA then looks at how many such assessments are borderline. And if you feel that the assessments are borderline, then we'll go into the next criteria wherein the type of feedback will be discussed. And there will be, say, for example, an action point given by the IQA to say that the assessments are consistently being done on a borderline basis, and that is where improvements are required, and then an action plan is put forward, and that is one of the feedback which is primarily discussed by the IQA and the assessor, by the IQA, and it is discussed with the assessor. So in such cases, you would generally see this bit happening because it is required from a point of view of ensuring that there is consistency applied across assessments which are being done by the assessors. So in such cases, you would generally see that these important bits are required to be done, and you would need to understand as an IQA what is the assessment cycle, what types of assessments are being planned, what is the duration at which these assessments would happen, how many times do they happen, how many learners are there, and when you have that information to hand, what then allows you to do is primarily plan your process of IQA to interpret, gather data, and interpret whether these findings are confirming to the assessments being fair, consistent, and reliable or not. And that is where these are important from a point of view of understanding whether the assessment decisions are correct or they are not correct. So this is an important part of the IQA process. And what I would do is basically show one or two sheets, which you would be able to relate to. And the reason I would want to mention that is that IQA, what we do see is that IQA is a process which typically happens, towards the end of where the qualification is done or complete and when the final exam board is happening. But we don't do the IQA from a point of view of being being a consistent process. And in such cases, what tends to happen is because it is not happening as a consistent process, what you are going to see is that it just merely becomes a checkbox exercise. So if I just quickly share my screen now to show you certain documents, you'd be able to put that into a bit of context to say that this is how these documents you should be aware of. So if I put it this way, this is one example of a document which is normally required to be filled up at the start of the process. For example, when you're doing an IQA for a particular assessor, you would write the name of the qualification, title, qualification, how many learners are there in the cohort, units that you're looking at. But these are the key questions that you're looking at asking and checking in the process. Are the standards for assessment criteria being met for the unit? Are there any guidelines for assessors given in the assignment brief? And are you checking if the assessors are actually following those guidelines in making those judgments? I can't make a judgment that, okay, if I'm the assessor, you are my favorite student and I'll give you a distinction. No, the criteria has to be clinical. And in most awarding bodies that we work with, like Ascentis, ATHE, OTHM, Pearson, the assessment criteria in terms of how the judgments have to be done for assessment of assignments, case studies, portfolio of evidence is very clearly defined in the assignment briefs. Has the work been accurately assessed? So here you are looking at the accuracy of the work. So when we look at the accuracy of the work in terms of applying, the accuracy, we are primarily looking at validity of the learner work which has been presented. Is the feedback criterion being referenced? So is the assessor essentially picking up that this is assessment criteria 1.1 or this is 2.1, is it 2.3, or are they just merely repeating the context by saying, okay, you have met, because the task says explain different types of, say I would say different sites, different types of HR models. So in the assessment, the assessor has written, the learner has explained different types of HR model. But have you identified what assessment criteria is this? Is it 2.1, 4.1? And have you also then given an evidence that what HR models has the learner identified in the work? So is the feedback criterion being referenced? Now, is the feedback provided to the learner allowing for improving performance? So when the learners get formative feedback, ongoing feedback, sometimes we have learners who send assignments over to say, I'm submitting my draft assignment, I'm aiming to achieve a distinction grade. Could you have a look at the assignment and give me feedback if this is, meeting the criteria? And in such cases, you are able to give developmental feedback as an assessor to the learner. So the IQA is trying to pick up, has the feedback to the learner being developmental at any given stage during the process of assessment. Now, when you look at summative feedback and if the qualification is graded, are you then giving appropriate comments to say why a merit or a distinction has been awarded? So when I look at it as an IQA, I would basically look at checking the assessor work and I would put a statement down. I agree with the assessor for awarding a merit grade. Now, why would I agree? I would have to basically look at my own reasoning in that sheet to say that the grade has been agreed because the evaluation and analysis in the tasks is quite detailed. And I do agree with the assessor's comments of awarding the merit grade. So In some cases, you have to put and contextualize comments as an IQA to give feedback on the assessments. And then declaration of work, which is primarily validity and, to a certain extent, plagiarism part of it that we are checking, collusion part of it we are checking, and do you agree with the final decision? So some reasoning has to be given. This is one form of document. The other form of document is if you have a cohort wherein you have a number of students studying, then what you also do is you maintain this across the board and you have an interim plan of IQA, and then you have a final plan of IQA towards the end of qualification. So if there are lots of units in that course and you would do IQA across assessors, you would cover a wide range of learners, you will cover all the assessment methods, you will cover all the units. And if there are various different sites, for example, if I look at University of Chester, they have 3-4 sites: Staffordshire, Warrington, Chester. And if there is an IQA process happening and there are different places in which the qualification is delivered, you're probably looking at all the assessment sites. Now, in such cases, the IQA's job is to look at making sure that all this is covered in order to ensure that when we say that, yes, when you're judging the quality of assessment process, are you covering all the learners? Are you covering all the units? Are you covering all the assessment methods? And are you covering all the sites if it is applicable? That also is one such part of the document. The third is if you have a way in which you would like to verify decisions, but it is primarily related to 1 or 2 learners, then in that case, a shorter version of this is also there. And sometimes when you look at the assessment cycle itself, what you're looking at is even IQing the assignment brief or the method of assessment before it is given out to the student. So in such cases, what you're going to be looking at is which area is the assessor assessing the, let's say, units. Do they have a qualification in that area? You're going into details of CPD, their academic background, their skill set. Then when you look at the assignment brief produced, is that assignment brief fit for purpose? Is it going to be able to cover the assessment criteria required to say that the unit is sufficiently, providing skills, knowledge, and is it meeting the learner's requirement? So in such cases, when you start at the very start, when you look at the assessment methods and the way they are being fixed, you are going to look at even getting into and auditing the process of the assessments which are going to be given to the learners. So in Pearson, which has implemented the quality code, you would see that the assignment briefs have to be IQA'd by the quality manager or the lead IQA before they are even given out to the learners. So if you start teaching a unit today, the IQA of that assignment brief and the way the brief has been produced, there would have been a feedback between the IQ and the assessor to say, okay, that's the content of the unit, this is the indicative content, these are the learning outcomes, these are the key descriptors. In some cases, it says understand, in some cases, it says be able to, in some cases, it says demonstrate. So, has the assessor created an assignment brief? Lecturer, assessor, tutor, whichever way you put it, has created the assignment brief, which is able to give the learners the opportunity to express and produce that evidence in the relevant format. Has the format of the assessment been decided? Whether it's going to be a presentation, an assignment, case study, a reflective statement, it could be, a presentation with a viva. All those things will have to be audited. And in such cases, you would look at internal verification to ensure that the methods of assessment being chosen by the assessor before they are released to the student, are they fit for purposes or not? And in such cases, if it is not fit for purpose, then you'll also give remedial action. Assignment brief sometimes needs to be amended. Scenario might be too brief in order to cover the learning outcomes and its criteria. The assessment grid is not included in the assignment brief. Loads of such things will have to be done in order to ensure that the assessment is fit for purpose. And that is where you would then go ahead and say that, okay, this is now meeting the criteria. So just to give you an example on your screen, if I look at the Pearson assignment brief, they are clearly stated for which academic year, who's the tutor, what part of the assignment is this for, when it was issued, when it was submitted, when it was IQA'd or internally verified, and does it have everything in it in the brief? So as a learner, if I'm sending it out, is there an introduction to the unit? Is there some general information? Are we divided on the submission format? The submission format in this case is a 1500-word assignment, and that has to be Harvard reference. It's a Word document, right? Harvard referencing, collusion, reading resources, and then is the scenario detailed enough? Is it covering the assessment grid defined by Pearson? Are all these tasks covered in the assignment criteria and the questions? Now, this bit is also checked by the assessor, or in this case, sorry, checked by the IQA. And in this case, whether you agree with the decision or not, you're going to sign up and agree that this assignment brief created is fit for purpose. And then and only then this will be released to the students who are studying that in that particular course. Now, if they are not fit for purpose, you'll give some remedial action once that is made and it is now fitting the purpose. That is when this would be issued to the learner. So when we talk about the aspects of criteria for judging the assessment, you have to have a very good understanding of the assessment process, and that is why you are in the IQA role. Now, if you don't have the understanding of the assessment cycle and the assessment process, there is no way that you'll be able to maintain or upkeep or uphold the quality side of things within say, for example, a particular qualification or institution wherein you are doing this. Is that okay? Any questions on this?
No, I mean, I might have to go in 10 minutes because I've got a class.
That's fine. No,
Is that okay? Thank you.
So the next assessment criteria we're going up to is looking at the ways in which an IQA can provide feedback to the assessor. Now, there are various ways in this feedback it should be done, but the bit in terms of summary is that these are the ways in which the IQA or the quality manager or the lead IQA can provide feedback to assessors, tutors, teaching assistants within the organization. Now, there is obviously professional feedback. There is training and development. If it is consistently being identified that there are areas which are gap areas, then in such cases, the CPD part of it has to be put in place wherein training and development is done, and some part of it is sponsored or conducted within the organization. There could be areas wherein technical support could be provided. For example, today with the use of AI tools, assessments can be marked. You look at Turnitin, you look at the Turnitin Studio, there is a rubric structure available for assignment briefs. Some part of the marking, checking is all done to a certain extent by the use of software. So that is where technical assistance or support essentially comes in. Training sometimes needs to be given to assessors to even also read and understand the contents of the plagiarism report, the similarity report, the AI detection. So in some cases, if I put it this way, that if today we have, as per OFCOL guidelines and awarding body guidelines, we have been asked to now look at, also detecting learner work for, AI, if this has been written by an assignment writer or some sort of a software, then in such cases, what we are also looking at is primarily ensuring to understand whether you clearly know and understand how to read AI detection report. What is the, let's say the different types of terminology used in the AI report. So the terminology used in the different types of report could be the burstiness, the consistency in terms of tone and voice. And when you look at, the output in terms of writing of the reports, there would be, areas which would be defined, which would say that this part of the report is humanized. This part demonstrates that it is trying to mimic human typing patterns. And in some cases, it might also say that there is no suspicious copy or paste, coming from different sources. Now, you would need to be able to trained to understand this terminology. And if you understand this technical terminology, then you are able to interpret the report also. And that is where technical support might be required from somebody who's the system admin to ensure that you clearly know what the reports are, how to interpret these reports so that you are able to then provide feedback to, learners. In our case, if we look at very briefly, there is a lot of administrative support which is provided through course coordinators and student coordinators, just as an example, wherein things like, for example, scanning of the assignments for plagiarism, AI detection is already done. Front cover sheets, are pretty much typed and made ready so that commenting can be done by the assessors. And then to a certain extent, you look at IQA plans and other bits which are made within the operational team, and then they are made available. So this is a part of an administrative support. But what would be the administrative support the IQA gives to the assessor? You are essentially looking at interim and final, plans. You are also checking in the middle to see if the assessment processes are being followed and they are consistent, the assessments are reliable, they are not lenient, they are not borderline. And because you're picking them up in the middle, it makes it easier because it is not going to be a situation wherein the learners have submitted the full year's work. They are no longer interested in any rework right now. But when you do the assessments, IQA towards the end, you find the assessments to be inconsistent, not reliable, they are not fair, they are lenient. And in such cases, it shows there's a lack of support or communication between the IQA and the assessor. So in such cases, this could be something which the IQA has to look at, wherein the ongoing support in terms of feedback, communication, and obviously checking of documentation has to be done. Then you have advisory support, which is primarily through policies, regulation, legislation, best practices, sharing of that. You have obviously in some cases, this was a question asked to one of the assessors to say, how do you manage your assessment load? So in some cases, do you feel that you have a lot of assessments to do? And if in such cases, the assessments are quite a lot and it's creating pressure, then there has to be a process wherein you're able to relay this back to the IQA as well. You have collaborative feedback and obviously resource provision. Resource provision is simple enough to understand because here you're looking at asking for resources which are required for you to be able to do assessment. So some part of this tends to be the necessary material required for teaching and learning. And after the teaching and learning is finished or completed, you then need to look at what resources are available to be able to help you in assessment. So things like plagiarism software, looking at similarity software, AI detection, development of Rubik's cube, assessment processes or cycles, an IQA plan. All this bit tends to be planned before even the course delivery starts. So this would be looking at summarizing the feedback, support, and advice which can be given to assessors, from a point of view of the IQA cycle. And I've explained each of these in individual slides apart from the table. And that I would suggest that if you go through, it'll give you more, points to understand and some of the bits that I've explained in terms of explaining those ways and points. Any questions on this so far?
Nothing, sir.
Okay.
No.
Let's look at the third assessment criteria, which talks about explaining the role of standardization in relation to assessment. Now, one of the things I mentioned at the start of the session was that what is the purpose of standardization? We use this word quite often. Now, if we understand what is standardization and the meaning of standardization, if we look at the dictionary meaning of the word standardization and what it means, it is basically the process of making something conforming or conform to a standard. The reason why you do standardization is that you want something to conform to a particular standard and you keep at it till you achieve that particular standard. So it's a process, it's a journey wherein you are going to take all the people involved in the process of assessment or teaching and learning to take them to a certain level at which you are required to work. And that ensures that process through which this is done is called standardization. Now, standardization ensures consistency and fairness. So consistency and fairness is required when we talk about education. So as an example, if I look at teachers, trainers, assessors, and quality assurers, they all need to sing from the same songbook. So when I look at, for example, the process through which we talk about if there is a quality manual within the organization, if you read the manual as an assessor, I read it as an IQA, somebody reads it as a quality manager, somebody reads it as a person in the administration team, they should all have and reach the same interpretation or meaning at the end of the day when we talk about the process of standardization, which goes to show that the wordings and the way things have been worded are essentially consistent in terms of explaining the policies and procedures within the organization. And this process helps to ensure that everybody who's involved in this process of assessment, verification, and certification is having a very fair and consistent understanding of how the learners would be assessed throughout their journey in terms of completing the course. So when we look at the process of standardization, we are essentially focused on ensuring a couple of things, and these couple of things that we talk about in the process of standardization tend to be focused on, ensuring that there is enough support given to teachers and learners so that they have resources. When I say support, they have resources, administrative resources, teaching and learning resources, technical resources, and these resources would help them to understand and grasp the topic fairly well. Now, why is standardization important in terms of as a process within higher education is because it helps to conform to those standards. So what it will do is it will basically detect any inconsistencies, any gap areas, any shortfalls, and those shortfalls then can be assessed, addressed essentially through the standardization meetings in higher education or further education. And these meetings tend to be practical in the sense that they would give out a particular task. Say, for example, in our case, when we look at assignments, because that tends to be the most, important or the widely used methods for assessing learner work. So what we do in the standardization meetings is we pick out a unit, pick out a learning outcome, and then give a front cover sheet and an assignment anonymized to all the assessors to mark. And what I would do as an IQA in that case is see whether marking is being done, across by different people in the same manner. Are they identifying assessment criteria? Are they reasoning why the assessment, evidence is achieving the assessment criteria? Are they providing feedback to the learners? And this is where I'm looking at consistency or conformance to consistency. And that is where the standardization as a process steps in. So the standardization requirements tend to be that we need to ensure that the assessments are fit for purpose. If they are graded units, all the assessors are arriving at the same grade. Are they assessing to a particular standard which is required for that unit by the awarding body? And are they following any criteria which are defined while they carry out the process of, marking the assignment? Fairness, reliability, and accuracy, or transparency, which is to be maintained. Because when you look at say for example the process of fairness, you're making sure that the same assessment criteria and the way you're assessing is being applied across all learners work. You're not being harsh to some, you're not being lenient to some. It is, fairness is applied from an assessor's point of view. Reliability, if we talk about you're referring and cross-checking with the assessment criteria given in the assignment brief, and you're following the same standards to mark all the assignments. Validity would mean that you're ensuring that when you check, you're checking to ensure that the intended learning outcomes are being met. The objectives of the assessment are valid in the sense that you are identifying the assessment criteria and you are ensuring that the evidence being related, which is being presented, is related to the assessment criteria, is not digressing or it's not too descriptive. So those are the bits that you would look at in the process of standardization. Now, one other activity which I would mention, when you look at standardization, this is done there are lots of activities which are carried out by the IQA, and standardization could be one such activity that the IQA would use to share best practices or to get everybody to conform to a particular standard. Now, when we talk about various activities which can be carried out in this process of standardization, they tend to be peer observations, they tend to be teaching observations, they tend to be looking at coverage in terms of marking of assignments. It also tends to be looking at various other documents like CPD documents. If you have completed trainings and if there were action points which were set, then are they completed? Are those set of activities completed? And are you now at a particular level of skill and knowledge to be able to assess? So sometimes you see this as a practical example is that when I carry out a standardization activity, what we are seeing is that a lot of you have marked a lot of assignments over the years. Now, after a point in time, what we are looking at is taking up a notch And some of you who are trained assessors are now being put into an IQA qual because we feel that you're hitting that criteria, you understand the process of assessment, and you're ready to step into the IQA role. So that is one such activity which is being done from a point of view of standardization, but related to CPD. That means training and development for that individual within the organization, that you're not just going to remain as an assessor, you're also going to, at some stage, progress to an IQA. And that is one of the activities under the process of standardization. Preparing materials for induction, initial assessments, schemes of work, lesson plan. How do you set assessments within the particular course or for the academic year? How do you interpret policies and procedures? How do you design assessments when it comes to assignment briefs? And what are the cycles through which the assessments are going to be put through? These are all part and parcel of various forms of standardization activities. We only are aware of one activity, which is okay. We look at standardization in terms of the assessment processes. Are assessors marking to the same standard or not? But if I look at the whole gambit of activities, the gambit of activities for a bigger institution, even in our case, we do it, is when a new course is introduced. As a course director, I would create presentations. I would look at creating assignment briefs. I would then at some stage look at, also benchmarking it against what the awarding body criteria is. And then in some cases, also look at bringing in resources, whether it's buying resources, creating resources, or deploying some of the existing resources to be able to, teach and deliver that qualification. That happens as a part of this process. Now, where is the quality manager's role to standardize it? You go through the presentations to see, is the material having the indicative content? Are they meeting the requirements of the learning outcomes? Are the key descriptors covered? That is a process of standardization. So in a bigger organization, you have a course manager or a program manager. The program manager's role is to review the program at the end of the year. Creation of schemes of work, lesson plan is done by them. Now, when an IQ activity starts, the first thing they ask in the meetings that we've had, the monitoring meetings, you would have seen that they've asked us to provide them what are the schemes of work for this qualification, how do the tutors teach, what is the lesson planning done. And this is where they want to see at an awarding body level, is there a standardization across in terms of how these programs are taught by tutors or lecturers in the organization. So they want to see how long do you teach this unit, how do you meet the guided learning hours, how do you cover the indicative content, what kind of activities do you do. This is all a part of standardization as far as the process of preparation or requirements to meet the assessments. So if these are not there, for example, if we teach a course and there's no presentation, there are no books, there are no resources, case studies, things like that, you would generally feel that in such cases, there is no way that there will be a consistency available as far as the process of assessments are concerned towards the end. So as an IQA, you're required to see what preparation has gone in from the time the student has been inducted. What were the initial assessments done to see if the learner is fit for purpose, in term fit at that level to be able to study the qualification. Then you look at in the institution if they have schemes of work and lesson plan and course material to teach that qualification or that course. Then you look at the teacher's requirement or tutor's requirement. Do they have qualifications, knowledge and skill, academic qualifications, knowledge and skills to be able to teach and assess that course? Then you see policies and procedures. Are they there within the organization? Are they implemented within the organization? Then you look at how the assessments are designed and are the assessments fit for purpose. You also do an audit of resources to see whether these resources are present for the teachers to be able to teach and deliver the course to the student. And then at the back end of it, you see the implementation, and that measurement of that implementation or checking of that implementation tends to happen when you look at experience of staff, you look at peer observations, you look at teaching observations, you look at consistency of running those processes, and at the end of it, you see whether these processes are following a particular quality code. And that tends to be the process of standardization. And what we get to see in an organization is that standardization meetings are run quarterly or 6 monthly or at least once or twice a year. And they are checking the conformance to these activities being carried out in the process of standardization. So if standardization meetings are being done, who is attending them? What is the outcome of those meetings? What is being discussed in that meetings? Discussion could be the outcome of an external examiner report. It could be discussions from the action points which have been given in that report. It could be discussions related to how the teaching and delivery is happening across the year. Are there any gaps? Are they falling behind? Are they on course? Do we have learners assessment meeting and the evidence that they're producing meeting the requirement criteria? And what is the success rate you are having at the end of it, at the end of the completion of the academic year, to measure whether the aims and objectives which were set at the start by the course manager or the program manager are being met or not. And that all will be covered as a part and parcel of your standardization activity. Now, this is an example of how we carry out these standardization activities, at UK Versity, and that table basically summarizes, an activity that would be required to be carried out with participants like assessors, students, quality manager, and obviously coordinators to ensure that we are meeting and conforming to certain standards. So this table actually summarizes it in terms of what all we do in terms of the standardization activity within, say, as an example, UK Versity. Is that okay? Is that understood? Any questions on this?
No, thank you.
No.
Okay. The last assessment criteria that we have is explaining relevant procedures regarding disputes about quality of assessment. So in this particular part, sometimes, what tends to happen is that when the assessments have happened and the learners have come back, or maybe the external examiner, when they come in for visits to clear the cohort, they find that the assessments have not been accurate. Then that means that the assessors maybe have been lenient, the work is borderline, not meeting the criteria, is not detailed enough, and is not meeting the criteria of the requirements which are provided by the institution documents, like schemes of work, lesson plan, that you are going to carry out this activity, use these resources, but at the end of the day, the output produced by the learners is not meeting that criteria. Now that leads to what are called disputes. Now, the disputes tend to be about the quality of assessment, how the assessors have actually passed the work or said that this work has passed and met the criteria. So in such cases, basically what happens is that you would find that the quality processes have slipped. There has not been consistency in applying these quality processes. The IQA process, as an end result, an external examiner or an institution which comes to audit and check to release certification will conclude that the IQA process is weak, that the IQA is actually not working, because IQA is supposed to be the internal quality assurance, is basically the eyes and ears of the awarding body or the organization, outside organization within the teaching institution or the college or the university. Now, if they are allowing these to slip, that means they concur and they conclude that the process of IQA is not working within the organization. And in such cases, what will happen is there'll be disputes which will arise wherein the EQA would mention that I will not clear certification, or in some cases, they would agree to mark down grades. Now, an example of this is if the assessor is given merit or distinction, but when the EQA samples the work, IQA samples the work, IQA agrees with the decision. And the EQA, when they come in to release certification, they do not agree with the decision. So what I would incur in that, conclude in that cases would be, number one, the IQA process is not working, because the IQA should have picked up these, shortcomings in the assessment, that the work is too brief, the work is descriptive, the work does not cover, the criteria which have been specified. And in such cases, the IQA should have given feedback to the assessor, and that would have meant that the work could have been corrected. The assessor then in that case could have given feedback to the learner. The learner would have then redrafted, amended the work, send it back to the assessment, again done, and then that would have conformed to the criteria. But that has not happened. So in such cases, what will happen is a dispute will arise. Now, what the EQA can do in such cases is and how do you say, in your case, IQA should handle if these kind of disputes actually arise? So the first thing that you're going to do is have an initial discussion with the assessor to handle this dispute. Maybe, for example, we have a learner like Aman, as an example, I'm just taking one. He feels that in his assignment he has achieved distinction, but somebody who's assessed the work, has given him only a pass. And the learner then decides to use the complaint policy to say that my decision, I'm not accepting the pass grade because according to me, I have done a lot of work and the work should, it deserves a distinction grade. So what will be the IQA's process, IQA's role in resolving this dispute about the quality of assessment? The first thing what will the IQA need to do is have an initial discussion with the learner to understand what are the reasons why the decision is being disputed with the assessor. This would be the initial steps to understand any clarify and understand any misunderstandings and to address these concerns informally. That would be the first step. Now, the second step would be if still after that it is unresolved and the learner does not agree, then in such cases, the IQA will have to ask the learner to put a formal, complaint in place. And that will go through a formal appeals process. Now, if this issue, after informal discussions between the assessor and the IQA and the learner, does not get resolved, then the learner can appeal the decision. The appeals are then put through a very structured process, which is a complaints process, and the grounds of the appeal will have to be established. That why is the learner claiming that the grade should be such, or has not been received and all that. So in such cases, what will happen is the IQA is required to go through the institution policies, understand if there was plagiarism, whether the time assignment was submitted on time, why is the assessor's decision this. So you'll have to look at collating all the policies and procedures which are available to be able to defend that decision. Then you would create a bit of a report, and then that report would go across to the assessment review panel. This would basically mean that the appeal, is either upheld or the appeal is not upheld. So in such cases, if the appeal is withdrawn by the learner after giving reasons that why this has not met the grade, then in such cases the issue closes. But if the appeal does not close, then in such cases it goes to the third party, which could be either the awarding body or it goes to an adjudicator, which has been established in the policies and the structure of the organization. And that the adjudicator will then give a final decision, which will be based on the findings of the IQA process. And that would be the final decision then communicated to the learner as well in order to resolve this dispute. So as an example, when we look at relevant procedures and how disputes can be resolved using quality, by quality manager or IQA, specifically for the purposes of assessment, grades, or decisions, this will need to follow the 4-step process. First, an initial discussion, followed by a formal appeal. If the appeal is withdrawn, the case closes. If it is not withdrawn, then it goes to the assessment panel. And once the panel is able to make a decision and the decision is upheld, then the case closes there. If it does not close, then the learner can then take it to a third party, which could be in this case an awarding body, an institution outside the college or the training provider. And in such cases, the adjudicator's decision would be final. And this process through which this decision is established and the quality side of things are maintained ensures transparency and fairness in handling disputes which arise because of the assessment quality decisions not being taken correctly. And the aim here is primarily to resolve these issues through a structured and an objective, review process. And this is what is required from a point of view of your understanding as an IQA to take this forward. Now, if I get a lot of these decisions, if you get, to make these decisions, then what is the process or the flowchart you follow? And that is what I've created here as an example. So initially you would look at, the student raising the concern with the assessor. If it is not resolved, then appeal is made, an appeal committee looks after it, and the decision of the appeal committee tends to be final. If even after that the learner refutes and takes it to an adjudicator, then the final decision would be done by the adjudicator or the awarding body. And once this process is over, feedback is then provided on the assessment practices and the IQA process to the organization. And that would mean that any shortcomings which are discovered during this particular process would then be, documented and would be given to the IQA. The IQA will need to work with the assessors to basically look at ensuring that these disputes do not arrive in the future, or arise in the future. And in such cases, the disputes typically tend to be discussed by, say, for example, there is a assessment policy which is normally, shown to the learners at the start when the assessment process is, or the learner joins the course. They need to have a good understanding of the assessment policy. They need to have a good understanding of the internal quality assurance policy or the verification policy. They need to understand plagiarism and misconduct policy. And these policies and procedures come in handy when you are trying to upkeep the quality of assessment and processes within the organization. Is that okay? So
Yes,
that
sir.
brings us to the end of today's discussion. And when we look at this as a part and parcel of one of the things which IQA needs to do, which is to also resolve disputes, you need to have a good understanding in terms of how disputes are going to be handled, what is the process to be followed, what policies and procedures should be there in the organization that you can fall back on and then use them for discussion with the learner, first being informal, then being formal through the appeal process, and then try and bring the dispute to a close. So any questions on today's session?
No, not from my side.
Good stuff. Any questions that you're in, Amrita? Any question that you're in?
No. No, sir. Nothing, sir.
Right, okay. That's great. So what I'm going to do is towards the end, I'm going to try and put forward a bit of a, there are some documents that we have in our system that you should be looking at from a point of view of IQA, to build this understanding of what we have discussed in today's learning outcome. So if I just very briefly show you the IQA, course and what policies and procedures you need to refer to for today's, discussion. I'm just going to bring that up on your screen so that you're aware. And I would suggest that those are the bits that you need to, primarily just read and understand so that, this will help crystallize this particular part of the discussion that we've done today. So very briefly, just showing that to you now before we close the session. So if you go on to the course, you generally see, there are policies that we have put in place for the learners to read. And obviously as assessors and as IQAs, you should be aware of this particular policy. So there is academic complaints and appeals procedure. There is an assessment policy. There is plagiarism and malpractice policy, a student's complaint policy. These are policies that you need. And apart from that, we don't upload the IQA policy here, but I think the IQA policy is on our website. So when you look at the website, there is an internal verification policy, and that policy also needs to be, referred to. You can get all the policies from the website by going on to the policy, and they are all given here. So the IQA policy is one of the policies that you need to be aware of for the organization. And that covers, I think, a good majority of things that we have discussed today. If you know from a point of view of legislation and policies that you need to be aware of as an IQA. So they will be for additional reading so that you are clear in terms of how appeal can be done, how, for example, the student, if they feel that they are not, satisfied with a particular decision, what is the process that they need to follow through? What is the role of the IQA in that process? and who are the key people involved. So all this part of it, is given and explained in the policy. So this will be for some additional reading, and I will see you guys next week. Next week is going to be the last assessment criteria and the learning outcome for this unit, which will help us complete Unit 1, and we'll follow that up with a bit of an assignment discussion.
Sure, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending, and a copy of this session will go up on the Moodle, wherein you'll be able to see that. I don't think I've made any update to the presentation, but what I will do is I'll add 1 or 2 handouts, which are policies underneath this particular learning outcome, which you can use for reading and obviously going through.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks again for attending, and I'll see you next week.
See
Bye
you.
for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you. Bye.